Hello, my name is Roger Lefebvre from Live Pulse News, and I have with me today David Pidcock, who is the leader of the Islamic Party of Great Britain and author. So welcome, David.
Thank
nice
you,
to see you.
Yeah, lovely to see you again.
I thought we'd have a chat today. I know we spoke a couple of months ago now.
Yes.
About how we could maybe turn things around at Westminster.
Yeah, absolutely.
To try to get some sanity in how we're governed in this country.
Right.
And we spoke about possibly UKIP was the way forward, that if we got some momentum behind UKIP to help them get elected, then things could change for the better by pulling out of Europe being a first step.
Absolutely.
And we both applied to join UKIP at pretty much the same time.
Yes.
My membership was accepted, but yours wasn't for some reason. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, it was accepted, and then I was notified that I wasn't I was not welcome in the UKIP, which I found quite strange and somewhat annoying, because I really thought that UKIP were the change that we need, and certainly they could be. And watching Carswell after his success in Clacton, I have to say I was very impressed with his speech. It was one. In fact, I think it was the best delivery and the content that I've ever heard. And so, I'm listening to him, watching him today in Parliament on RT, as it happens. He was addressing some issues, and he seems to be a very serious player. So, from that standpoint, it looks like UKIP will probably make the difference, and will be able to form the next government, because it looks like certainly Clegg has shot himself in the foot so many times, and they're all basically fools. That's the problem, a ship of fools.
That's right. So why do you think they rejected your membership then?
Well, I can only say I think, because I still get communications from members of UKIP who still appreciate the sort of contributions I was making regarding, I mean, the big thing was multiculturalism, but above all is the issue over the money. Why are we seeing time after time governments of the left and the right and the centre not addressing the real issue? Why a government should borrow money and be dependent on the City of London? It's totally insane. And listening to Nigel Farage in some of his interviews, very impressed. But nobody's talking about this key issue of expanding M0 and reissuing, which they could do now immediately. The scarcity or the shortage of money is artificial. And it's to maintain the scarcity of money, so you'll borrow from the City of London at a rate of interest, rather than doing what Keynes suggested, which was to spend everything into existence at zero interest. But of course that would spell the euthanasia of the rentier, the city slickers and those guys. Of course, Cameron and all these guys, Nick Clegg's father's a banker, his grandfather was the chair of ABN, now ABN AMRO. And of course, you have bankers' men placed there to make sure there is no change in the existing system, and they'd sooner waste people and save money for the kikes in the city.
That's right. I must say, I noticed when I went to the local UKIP meeting where I joined, when I stood and made this point that you're making now, why aren't we talking about the money? And if UKIP had as a policy the issuing of money into the economy through the Treasury at zero interest rates, and nobody wanted to know. Right.
Well, this is a start. Well, let's say listening to those who are sponsoring some of UKIP. I mean, you've got the king or the spread betting, and you've got Paddy Power and people like that who are. I mean, you don't need gamblers' money, and you don't need money from those sources. All governments, left, right, and so Miliband, Millipede, whatever you wish to call him, the Treasury should issue everything they want. How many? You need so many billions for the army, so many billions to fight Ebola, and all the things. Now, Treasury could issue that within a few minutes of them being informed
That's right.
by the Chancellor to do that. But they're all defending a system that has basically enslaved this country and the rest of the world for 300 years.
Yes. And do you think the people at the top of UKIP understand the money deception that has gone on for all this time?
I can't imagine that somebody like Nigel Farage doesn't know, because he's been a city player. He's been on the Kaiser report.
Yes.
And Max Kaiser certainly knows what the crack is.
Yeah.
And but unfortunately, you've got they're towing a party line, and they're only allowed into Parliament if they're going to maintain the existing status quo. But the battles that we've seen throughout history, with all the way from the beginning, we had Oliver Cromwell. The Civil War was all to bring about a return of the usurers to the City of London, and Cromwell was paid by Manasseh ben Israel from Holland. And if you read Isaac Disraeli's account of the event, of course Benjamin Disraeli's father, the whole game of what happened was Cromwell was promised the money, but only after he put the king on trial. The Great Fire of London, you know, before in 1666, was all planned to allow them to pass the Coinage Act. And of course other things that went through Parliament. While people are putting out the fires, they were passing laws in Parliament that enslaved us. That is really what we have to, people out there need to know. That the system could change, and regardless of whether it's UKIP or the Conservatives or anybody, or even the Green Party, who should have more nous, we could change this whole thing within 24 hours.
Yeah. But the Green Party have been taken over by the same masters, haven't they?
Of course. They know that if they're going to, they want to, it's like a game, a play. You want to be part of the gang and play out a part. It's a small bit part, but you know, the whole thing about, you listen to the arguments of politicians, it's all about how history is going to report you. They're all looking at, you know, how things are going, where your statue is going to be, rather than why are the people suffering now when it could all be changed like that, as we did in 1914. There's a brilliant book by the man who was the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England and also the head of Vickers Industries, Vickers Armaments, Vincent Vickers, whose factory is in Sheffield, very close to where we are now. He pointed out that he would fight the gold standard and the Governor of the Bank of England, because let's not forget, the Governor of the Bank of England, Montague Norman, had rearmed Germany prior to and helped with the rearming of Germany and the building of the Japanese fleet and everything. And so he knew that the enemy was the Bank of England and the City of London. So that's what we have to go back to and say, we could change this whole issue of the scarcity of money. The Treasury issues an order to the Bank of England, or just the Treasury, to issue what we did in 1914. I digress from the point. 1914, the Bank of England went bankrupt in August. How did the Bank of England avoid being declared bankrupt? It had promised to redeem all the money it had issued in paper with sovereigns, gold. But they'd issued tens of millions of papers,
right,
but they only had maybe 1% of what they'd actually issued. And so therefore, when people came knocking at the door, the bank had to declare bankruptcy, except for the smart move by the Secretary of the Treasury called John Bradbury. And he, with the support of the Prime Minister, which was David, what's his name? The Prime Minister, Lloyd George. They issued 500 million Treasury notes. Now, it was the first time a Treasury note had been issued with the King's head as the stamp. So when they were issued to the lines and lines of thousands of people waiting outside the Bank of England, people went away with the knowledge that that money was stood behind by the nation with the King's head on it. So they went away quite happy. They didn't want the gold, they just wanted something that they could spend and buy things with. And that's all that needs to happen. Gold is totally irrelevant. You don't need it. It's a trap, a disaster trap. But the Bank of England, Governor of the Bank of England, all of them, right up to Mark Carney now, they're all placemen. And of course, Mark Carney is Goldman Sachs.
Yes.
Most of the heads, they're all part of the cabal, the Kike's army, as we call them.
Yes. So how do you think we can break this?
Well, if enough people get the opportunity to watch the programs that you're doing, and there are others as well, then people just need to know there is no necessity for any nurse to have to be treated the way they are, to be put out in danger without being fully rewarded and protected. No fireman, nobody needs to go, no policeman. Everything can be done basically overnight, but people need to go on the march and demand outside the Treasury or Number 10, issue the Bradbury, reissue Treasury money to stop the rot.
That's right. So you would issue the money into the economy through capital projects that serve the nation?
Not necessarily. No, I think that's one thing. I mean, you know, this is what Roosevelt did, and no, you don't. We need money for consumption.
Yes.
If you have, like, look, when you have, what was his name? The American president came, Benjamin Franklin, when he was asked why the colonies of America were in far better condition than we were with poverty, etc. He said it's obvious. If we have $1 million or $10 million worth of goods ready to be consumed, we ensure that there is $10 million worth of money in circulation to consume that.
Yeah.
So consumption, what's wrong with the economy now? We don't have an economic problem.
No.
We have a monetary problem, and that has always been the way now for hundreds of years. And just reading history, Macaulay and all these great writers, you'll find that the problem is scarcity of money because it's in the hands of usurers, kikes.
That's right.
And so the Treasury's got to bypass them, and if necessary, let them go to the wall.
And this is how we're controlled and farmed, in effect.
Totally.
We're being totally farmed, aren't we?
Totally, yes, absolutely. So the solution is very, look, the letter goes every year from the Chancellor to the Bank of England agreeing to the terms, basically, that they will keep issuing money as a debt, rather than the Treasury issuing it to themselves and bypassing it and saying to the health service, to the Army, Navy, Air Force, the schools, the colleges, right, how much do you need to run the whole system?
Exactly.
10 billion, all right for you, then issue it. You spend it into circulation. The secret is there's only one issuer, and it is issued as a credit, not as a debt plus interest. What we try to do, now the Channel Islands, in 1694, when the Bank of England was foisted on us, remember, in very almost walking distance from where we are now, the Earl of Devonshire and three others, the Duke of Leeds and three others, met in the Revolution House in Chesterfield, Old Whittington, and they met to plan the bringing of the William of Orange to England in 1688. Now, if you go into the Revolution House today, in October 2014, it's the same as it was in 1688. It's exactly laid out, and it's on the plaque outside. It says this is where the conspiracy, basically, to establish the Bank of England and bring William here. And so this was treason. So they should have all been hung for treason. And so from 1694, the Bank of England was set up with a debt on the British people till the day of judgment at 8%. Now it was £1.2 million, and that was spent, that was given, or that was contracted by William on behalf of the British people to the day of judgment. That 1.2 million has now tumesced to, was it 1.4 trillion?
Yes.
And this year, roughly, we'll spend somewhere between 70 and 90 billion in interest payments on that original debt. Now, who, with a brain in the head, would ever, if you're conservatives, I mean, why would you borrow something at retail when you could get it at cost? I mean, it's insane. But that's the problem.
Yeah. And what percentage of people's taxation would you think actually goes towards the payment of this
Well,
interest?
it's now becoming almost that all the total GDP is required to pay off that interest. Now, it's insanity. Well, when we stood in the election, the Islamic Party of Britain, by the way, not Great Britain, it would be great if they didn't have the system that we've got. We were able to show from the figures there that 76 pennies of every pound collected in poll tax went in interest payments.
Right.
Now, what sort of hemorrhage, well, what sort of insanity is that? But that is the nature of the beast. And you're destroying the people, as Thomas Jefferson pointed out, 1815. He said the modern theory for the perpetuation of debt has drenched the earth with blood and crushed its inhabitants under burdens ever accumulating. That was 1815. The Battle of Waterloo, which we'll be no doubt gloating about next year, 2015, the Battle of Waterloo was that Napoleon was trying to liberate Europe from the City of London. He'd seen the debt of France, like all cancer, and you know about cancer. If you look at the growth of interest and the growth of cancer in the host, it becomes exponential, always, and it destroys everything in its path. So the Battle of Waterloo, that was a disaster for Europe. It was a disaster for this country because we're still suffering from that disease that Napoleon had set about challenging. Now, when he saw the debt of France, he said, the deadly facts herein reveal that it is amazing that this monster interest has not devoured all humanity. It would have done so long ago had not bankruptcy and revolution acted as counterpoisons. Right. So revolution, it comes and it's an automatic result of interest. Interest always causes war. Now, the wisdom of, say, the people in Lagash in Sumeria, now present-day Iraq, 2400 BC, debt was automatically cancelled in the 7th year. It was never allowed to go beyond 7 years, because if you take a piece of paper, you cannot fold it more than 7 times. Right. So there is something about the 7. Now they cancel debt because otherwise society self-destructs. Paedophilia, alcoholism, prostitution, violence, all those things result in the society which we see now. Absolutely. And because that is the driver of debt. Poverty leads to disbelief. So that's what we're seeing now. So if they had the wisdom then, and of course the Mosaic Law, 2000, of course, almost 2,000 years later, the same law of Moses is the Mosaic Law of Jubilee, the year of Jubilee. Debt is written off. And that's what we have to do now. Debt must be written off.
So if our nation borrows money through the Bank of England
yes.
and is charged interest,
yes.
people have been taught that the Bank of England is nationalised.
Oh, well.
Now, we believe that when an institution is nationalised, it belongs to the people.
And it becomes accountable.
So how can the people charge themselves
Very
interest?
good. As we said, Mrs. Thatcher, when Ken Palmerton and we met Thatcher, and he's a Liberal. His grandfather, by the way, was Lord Palmerston, who apparently died without issue, but he had at least 3 wives.
Right.
And Ken Palmerton, his father changed his name by deed poll to Palmerton from Palmerston. He said to Mrs. Thatcher, "Why do we do this?" She said, "Because it's money we owe to ourselves." He said, "But I'm not a masochist. Why don't we cancel it?" She said, "We cannot buck the market." All right. Well, we know about Thatcher. We know about her dubious. She doubled our national debt from 76 billion to 186 billion from the time she came to office to the time she went out of office. Now, how conservative and prudent is that?
That's right.
It's nonsensical.
Yeah. So do you think the control of the Bank of England is because when it was supposedly nationalised, that there were conditions set by the original bondholders that it had to
Well,
do what they're doing?
it was never nationalised. It was just nominally nationalised. In the book that I finished for Arthur Swan, who was locked up in 1939 under Regulation 18B for daring to point out that the Bush family and Averell Harriman and the Bank of England had rearmed Germany. He was locked up with Mosley and Archibald Moore Ramsey and what they considered to be right-wing lunatics. But he blew the whistle on that. But in the book I finished for him, which is called The Other Road to Serfdom, we had Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom.
Right.
Well, the other, which of course he was Thatcher's guru, and but he didn't identify the real culprit, or the equally valid varmint was unregulated capital is the other road to serfdom. What we've now just witnessed in the 30s, 1929 was a planned crash so that the usurers would end up owning everything, the farms and all the factories. The same thing now. We had, unfortunately, David Blunkett, who I know very well. I know him for the liar that he is. In his diaries, Martin Brighton, who is a good friend of ours, and he said that he notified me that was I aware that David Blunkett's diaries for the year 2004 contain the following passage. And Blunkett in his diary was saying, then to special cabinet. And Gordon announced, you know, he was pleased with him, etc. But he notified us that there would be a major downturn towards the end of 2008. Now this is 4 years and a bit before then. But he's telling them to make sure that you start to draw in your horns in preparation for the crash that was coming in 2008. Now, how did he know? Because he'd sold off the gold and all the other things. He was a plant. He's no better than anybody else. You know, they're all kikes and they're all bought and paid for, and they're blackmailed because of certain dark secrets that we know are now beginning to come out. That's why they do the things that they're doing. Yes. I won't enter into that at the moment, but it's something that we have to realise. Why would somebody know 4 years in advance and announce to the cabinet? Now, what David Blunkett said, he said, I put my hand on his shoulder and said, Gordon, I'm astonished that you would wish to remain Chancellor with such an awful scenario looming. He said there was deathly silence. I heard jaws dropping. Then everybody started to laugh. And Tony later said to me, only you could have got away with that. Yeah. But I wondered if I did, but I just couldn't resist making the comment. Now, just before the last election, Sheffield University had a meeting in which Blunkett was called to address it about social, helping social matters, etc. And he had the audacity and the cheek to say that, yes, that the crash of 2008 came as such a surprise, it was a shock to us. That's right. So I said, David, what about your diary? I'm just reading from it here. It said, in 2004, Gordon announced the forthcoming crash of 2008, and I'd like to invite you to come and tell us the story on Burngreave Community Radio. He refused to. I said, David, I know that you're not deaf, because we've spoken about it before, but at the second prompting, he got up and walked out and refused. So that's the point. They lie, they're paid to lie, they're compromised in all kinds of things. They should, some of them, they should be shot, I have no doubt, because they're treasonous, poisonous people. That's
right. And knowing what we know and looking at solutions, if you and I were in power, let's say, in office, serving the people, would it be as simple as issuing a cheque from the Treasury to the Bank of England to clear the national debt, or do you take them to court and put them through a trial for treason for deceiving the people? How would you?
Well, I think first of all, you don't need to give the Bank of England a cheque. The Treasury should issue directly into circulation the money. Whatever the national debt is, then they've had more than a pound of flesh. That's right. But you could liberate it with some institutions, but basically you redeem it with your own money. The city has to be basically wiped out. It is of no value to us.
Do you think the city should be made to become part of England because it's a separate state, as I understand it, at the moment? With its
no, it needs to be reformed. Basically, usurers have to be hung, drawn, and quartered.
Yeah.
I mean, interest is the system that they've run us now. Is created every war we've had with the French, every war we've expropriated and destroyed every economy. Now, people in Somalia and Africa and elsewhere are coming here because they're following the money.
Yes.
And the disease is here. So. You must expunge the disease. We need David Ricardo, great Jewish economist, 1823, issued the plan for the National Bank of England, which I incorporated in the book that I finished for Mr. Swan. And so they know the solution, but of course, as Keynes said, it spells the euthanasia of the rentier. They don't want to basically be got rid of or to be made to do something productive. So the city is the cause of the problem. So that's where the disease has to be cauterized and make them do something that's useful. Now, we go back to the legislation. The Bank of England, I have all the documentation. But also, when the battle, Norman Smith was a Labour MP for Nottingham just after the war. And I've got all the Hansard records of basically the nationalisation of the Bank of England, which was only done in name because later on in 71, and I met Barbara Castle and I met many of them who, when they went to become part of the government, as they did, none of them were allowed to delve into anything relating to the Bank of England. And under the standing orders, when it was raised in Parliament, Standing Order 18, etc., or whatever it was, said the specific issues of the national debt, the specific issues of the ownership of the Bank of England, and how it had arrived at are specifically verboten. You're not allowed to discuss. And it's in the book. I can give you the actual, but that's on record. So you're not allowed, because it was never nationalised.
So the Bank of England is in effect above the law.
It's totally above the law.
It doesn't have to produce its books or anything. It
is above the law. It's above God's law as well. I mean, it is a major source of disease, and all the banks have been. The Federal Reserve is the feudal reserve. It's owned by the same, basically 13 families own everything. And that's the bit. It has to be come into public ownership, and we want public credit. What we try to do, I mean, the Guernsey and Jersey refused to sign away their rights to issue their own money, 1694, which is why taxation is low. People want to go and live in Guernsey and Jersey, the Channel Islands, to avoid capital punishment, because their capital isn't punished by taxation because the government never borrowed the money in the first place. So if you don't borrow the money, you don't have any interest to pay. So what we try to do is to put a kebab in the machine and get a sheep at the other end. It ain't ever going to work. But we've been seduced. Look, the Lord's Prayer, for instance. In Scotland, they still retain the correct translation, which is, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. But we have changed it to forgive us our trespasses. Now, forgive us our debts means that. Debts are forgiven. There is no continuity of debts. They have to be wiped out. And the whole city of London should not exist as it is. I mean, there should be maybe 4 or 5 people down there. The whole rest of it is totally and utterly counterproductive.
So the solutions for the nation are quite simple. We have no debt. We have false austerity.
Yes.
And we can just issue whatever money is needed into circulation so people can get on with what they have to do.
Absolutely.
It's that simple.
Yeah, but we have, now why we're cutting back on staff when I have broke my arm recently, and you people are struggling to try and be in 3 places at once. There should be sufficient staff, there's sufficient money. You can never have a scarcity of money.
No.
Only if they want for you to be paying and maintaining a debt that they've already had thousands and millions of tons of pounds of flesh, and they don't deserve 1 Gersh more. So the Treasury should be manned by people who do understand what's happening. Whatever government's in, they have to assume the right of our government, the people who voted them in, to do the right thing by them. And the city has to go to hell.
Absolutely. And if this were managed, that we pulled out of Europe and the corruption of Brussels,
Yeah.
Westminster was returned to the nation, we issued our own currency. Obviously the banking cartel aren't going to take this line down, are they? So as a nation...
But why should we?
That's right. As a nation, we would have to be self-sufficient to manage the embargoes that would be imposed on us.
Doesn't that let them embargo? Look, it is irrelevant. The whole thing is a scare tactic. FUD, fear, uncertainty and doubt. What do we need? We could survive just with an internal market.
Yes.
Why do you only need to export what is surplus to what your requirements are? Absolutely. No country needs to export because the balance of this whole game is the money system. The exchange rate, etc., is a con. It's totally verboten under every religious law and every common sense law. Why? But we've set the rules for the rest of the world, and they are paying the price. And of course, the British people are here. Absolutely. They don't need to. We don't need to export. It's irrelevant.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we'll call it a day on that, David. Thank you very much indeed. I hope all of you at home have learned something from David's expertise and food for thought, and get up and do something. Thank you very much.